by us, for us, with us in mind, and something that everybody has, almost as if they feel that they have a stake in it. And that is why I think it is extraordinary and an extraordinary opportunity to do so at this time with all the pieces moving on the international space.
Well, one of the really important things, and you guys kind of made mention of it there when you were speaking, the whole issue of public participation, because I think especially given the problems with how our independence, our existing constitution was created with practically no input from the public, it's really important that people feel a part of the process, which is why I'm trying to bring in as many questions from the public as possible. And William has a very important question.
Hello, I'm William Mullings, and my question is, how is constitutional reform different from general legislative reform?
Nice.
So the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. It sits at the top of the hierarchy and it sets the stage for everything. The Constitution sets out a process for constitution making and constitution reform. There are similarities with ordinary pieces of legislation, but there are also fundamental differences. And as the supreme law, we're actually bound by it in terms of how we pass laws generally. So all the rules governing lawmaking are set out in the Constitution. But the Constitution itself is a special document which sits at the top of the hierarchy. The Jamaica Constitution has 3 types of clauses. The ordinary clauses, to change those, you require a vote of all members of both houses, not just all members present and voting. We have the ordinarily entrenched provisions, and there is an elaborate process for changing that, set out at section 49, but at the end of the day, it requires a vote of 2/3 of both houses. And then we have the deeply entrenched provisions. So those are the ones that are put beyond the reach of Parliament, even with cooperation from both sides. In addition to what is required to change the ordinarily entrenched provisions of 2/3 in both houses, the electorate must approve the bill to make the change. And this is where we are. That's what we call the referendum. So for those matters that are of critical importance, which cannot be easily tinkered with by or the elected representatives in Parliament, the people will have to have their say. And those are the matters essentially that we're now wanting to change. In the Constitution, there are essentially 13 provisions that are deeply entrenched. It's also designed to be a slow process, not hastily done. So the bill that introduces the change will have to be laid in the House. There has to be a time lapse between first and second reading, second and third reading, 3 months. So we have at least a half year of dead time. And that does not include the rest of the work that is involved, the kind of debate. And then there is a time between the passing of the bill and sending it to the electorate for the vote to be taken. And I think that is where most of the work will be done, and engaging the public.
Yeah.
Because we do not have direct participation in lawmaking. It's a representative process. So that this, I think, will involve members of Parliament approaching their work perhaps for the first time, their lawmaking role in a different way, because they will be required to go to their constituents and speak to their constituents and inform them about what is to come in the law.
I'm nearly at break, but Prof, let me ask you very quickly. Over the years, there's such angst over the provisions to change the Constitution when we need the 2/3 in both houses, in the Senate as well as a referendum. Was it wise to put those protections in place? Did it make sense?
I think yes and no. It's wise that we do have a process which allows not just quick overnight legislative provisions, but no, in that it sometimes, in my opinion, is too rigid, that many constitutions in the Caribbean do not require, for example, to change the head of state from a monarch to a president.
Exhibit A, Barbados.
Exactly. It doesn't require a referendum in that sense. But from the citizen's point of view, the importance of the Constitution is that whenever a citizen believes that a law passed abridges her or his rights, they can go to the Constitutional Court, and the Constitution can say, even with the unanimity of all the politicians in the Parliament, the judges can overrule it and say, look, this is inconsistent with our Constitution. It doesn't protect the rights of our citizens in accordance with the provisions of the Constitution. So it's very important for our citizens to know what is in the Constitution and to recognize that they have that final recourse in relation to all kinds of matters, the protection of the environment, which is very much a topic of discussion now, in relation to the violation of rights of freedom of movement. So the Constitution is our final arbiter of what is right and wrong in the sphere of law.
All right, let's go to the first break. We come back with this discussion on constitutional reform, the way forward.
Television broadcasters are leading the way with a new system that will merge the capabilities of over-the-air broadcasting with the internet.
Thank you so much for staying with us for this special program on Jamaica's constitutional reform, The Road Ahead. The program is brought to you by the Jamaica Accountability Meter portal, JAMP, with sponsorship from the Open Society Foundations. I'm Dion Jackson Miller. Now, the role of the parliamentary opposition is crucial in any type of constitutional reform. You heard us referring in the previous segment to the need to have a two-thirds majority in both houses when amending certain parts of the Constitution, which means at least one opposition senator has to vote with the government for that two-thirds majority to be reached. So I spoke with opposition spokesperson on Justice Donna Scott Motley to get a sense of how the opposition is approaching this. We keep getting asked, Senator, is to what extent is the public going to be able to participate in the process going forward? How important an issue is that?
Well, I don't think from the terms of reference that there will be much scope in phase one. But in phase two, because that's how they've approached it, they've phased it. In phase two, I can see where that is going to be one of the things that we will do. We'll engage the public. Now, phase one deals with the matters on which there has been some consensus over the years. And so it is going to start mainly with the Republic. In fact, when you look at it, I don't think there's going to be anything other than moving to a Republic that will be contemplated. Now, let me say this. I do believe that it is important that the public be engaged in reforming the Constitution or making a new Constitution. One of the things that I want to see is a simple Constitution, because the Constitution is for the people. And basically the one we have now is highly complex. You could have 3 attorneys looking at a section and everyone giving a different opinion. But Dion, we have been on this journey since 1975. That is when Michael Manley first spoke about us becoming a republic. I dare to say it even goes back further to 1962. But for today, let's take it as from 1975. A constitutional reform division was established in the Ministry of Justice in 1977. It's 2023. It's over close to 50 years ago. And my fear is that if we were to debate the matter again, go back through the processes which we have done, which is with town hall meetings, school hall meetings, church hall meetings, that we won't make that move until after, like I'm in a wheelchair. And I think it's very important that we shed these last vestiges of our colonial past.
Okay, so I hear what you're saying, but at the same time, the questions we have coming to us are from people who say those agreements you speak about were reached over a generation ago. That was the point at which people decided, let's go for a ceremonial president. And there are a lot of people today who are saying, we don't agree with a ceremonial president, similar to what we have now in the Governor General. We want an executive presidency, a change to the role. So how do you respond to that kind of concern, that maybe we do need to start the process over with town halls, with public fora, with discussions to figure out what we want to do?
Well, what I would like to recommend is that we take a look at the approach which was adopted in Barbados. In Barbados, the Constitution does not require a referendum. In that instance, Prime Minister Mia Mottley had won all the seats in the House. And in their Constitution, the government actually had 21 of the seats, the 30 seats in the Senate. So a decision was made to install or vote for, because both houses had to agree, the president as a ceremonial head of state. But that appointment only lasts for 4 years. So after 4 years, there's a possibility that if there's the need or the desire of the populace for a change, it can then be implemented. Along that pathway since 2021, there have been discussions on how to go forward. And I would recommend that we approach it the same way, that we have a similar approach, and we can take the time now to engage the people over that period as to whether they want an executive presidency. Do remember that that was one of the delays in having agreement on both sides. The People's National Party wanted an executive president. The Jamaica Labour Party wanted a ceremonial president. And eventually, when we saw that it was proving to be an obstacle in our moving forward, we moved and agreed with the Jamaica Labour Party so we could get things going. But from Michael Manley, then we had P.J. Pattison, then we had Portia Simpson Miller, and we have now Andrew Holness. There has been agreement. I'm sorry, I left out Mr. Siaga. Bruce Gold. Yes. But everybody has agreed. In fact, Michael had set a deadline of 1981. PJ set a deadline of 2007. And we still have not passed that goalpost. So for me, my urgency is that I think that it's very important that Jamaica implement this decision, not just with the Republic, but also to leave the Privy Council, because these are the two things that we are hanging on to literally, and the two impediments to what I consider our real nationhood.
If it is, though, that we're going to go the Barbados route, as you're suggesting, then the public would need to be told right at the start, right, that we're making a change in this way so that we can do it quickly, but that we will come back and have the broader and deeper conversation as to what form we want to see the office of head of state eventually take.
I think it's incumbent on the government to communicate with the people exactly where they want to go. And I can assure you that as the opposition, we'll play our part. Once we have the initial meeting of the Constitutional Committee, and I'm pleased that finally we are going to be able to have a meeting date. Once we do that and we are clear, we have a clear understanding as to the trajectory that we are embarking on, I think the opposition needs to also be part of the process of letting the people know where we plan to go. Because do recall that we are going to have a referendum, and a referendum has proven challenging in countries where it's required to do so. St. Vincent couldn't do it. Prime Minister Gonzalez admitted that he loaded up the referendum ballot. Grenada couldn't do it, Bahamas couldn't do it, and Antigua couldn't do it. And that is because some divisive politics crept into the decisions. So I think it is important that the opposition and the government really come to an agreement as to the process so that they can be the ones to deal with the populace about it.
But the concern, though, is that precisely because it's so difficult to have a referendum and to get a positive vote, people are afraid that we have a referendum now when we put in a ceremonial president, and then it's going to be simply too hard to have another one to try to put in an executive presidency. So the concern is, why not just do it properly right from the start?
Well, perhaps in the phase 2, we will have to look and see whether the referendum clause really works, whether it is viable for us in this kind of democracy. The referendum, changing the referendum clause does not mean that you're not going to engage the people, because as I said at the outset, the Constitution is for the people, and the people must have a say. We recall, for example, that the Charter of Rights is the latest amendment that has been made to the Constitution. And at that time, we were very proud of the rights which were recognized. For example, the right to freedom of discrimination based on your race or your sex. The clause which deals with the right to a healthy environment. But now, so many things have evolved that there are even more rights which we should be examining. The Jamaica AIDS Society, for example, speaks to the right to health and the right to freedom of discrimination because of your sexuality. So we have come a very long way over the decades. And that is why I agree with you that we have to really consult the public as to what they think is important to be protected in our constitutions, particularly in the area of their rights.
One of the questions we got from somebody who responded to my Twitter post on the issue was, what's going to be the role of the opposition in this?
Well, the official role of the opposition is to deliberate in the Constitutional Committee to advance the views, and naturally that will mean advancing the views of the party and of its membership. I want to take it a little further, because I really want to see the opposition engage the people in very much this way that we used to with the People's Forum, which was really taking the issues to the people and getting their input. That, for me, is one of the most exciting things about politics, and the reason why I'm still there after so many years, because the people actually know what they need and they know what they want. It's just that they are so infrequently asked to play a part.
So the second phase you mentioned now, what you envisage there?
The second phase, as the minister has envisioned it, is to deal with things like looking at the Charter of Rights, as I said, looking at Section 20, which gives them the right to declare a state of emergency, whether it should be broader, should it include, speak specifically to a pandemic, as we experienced with COVID, and should it give some more latitude to the administration when it determines that it is necessary. That is going to be, that is going to take some time to go through, because you have to have a fine balance. When you looked at the last meeting of the Joint Select Committee, they were very clear that if you were going to abridge any of the rights of the Constitution, it had to be reasonably or demonstrably justified, and that the onus was going to be on the government to prove that it was demonstrably justified. That is a protection which I think is very, very important, that we preserve no matter what. So I think that phase 2 is going to take us a little longer than phase 1, and that it was admirable of the government to take the decision to separate the phases, because the other phases are likely to involve very contentious matters. Where the irony of it is, Dion, when you are in government, you take a particular view because you want to have the latitude to do certain things. And when you are in opposition, you see your role as that of protecting the people from the abuse from the state, the absolute power which the state has. We have to play our role of a good opposition. And when it is fully ventilated with the people and the people are on board with some of the changes, I think that is the way that you get a good workable constitution.
And we'll be back with our studio audience as well as our panelists right after this.
Hi, I'm Marlene Street Forest, Managing Director of the Jamaica Stock Exchange, and you're watching JNN News Worth Watching.
Hi, I'm Shane Masters, producer-presenter here at Jamaica News Network, JNN. For all the latest on the local, regional, and international scene, tune into Frontline News at 8 p.m. Mondays to Fridays. You can also follow us on our social media pages at Jamaica News Network, JNN. News worth watching.
Thank you so much for staying with us for this special program on Jamaica's constitutional reform, The Road Ahead. The program is brought to you by the Jamaica Accountability Meter Portal JAMP with sponsorship from the Open Society Foundations. I'm Dion Jackson. You know, one of the really great things I think just about having this process gearing up is how much interest we're starting to see from members of the public. They have a whole heap of questions.
Nice.
And we want to go to this question from Brianna.
Hi, I'm Brenna Edwards. Jamaica is planning to reform its constitution, and as a citizen, I want to know how can I become involved or how can I participate in the process?
Yeah, nice.
And in fact, we also got a similar question from Grace, who tweeted. Let's just bring up her tweet if we could. And Grace is also asking whether or not citizens are going to be allowed to have any say in this particular process. All right, so between that and between the comments made by the opposition spokesperson on justice a little earlier on, I know there's a whole lot to respond to, and we hope to get some questions from our studio audience starting in this segment. But before I go to the minister, who I know has some comments. Daniel, let me start
So
with
much
you.
to unpack.
So much.
Let's start with understanding and appreciating that with the Constitution comes the definitive decision about who has power and what they do with it. And that's why we need a Constitution. We need a Constitution to make sure we know how they must govern, what is the rights and responsibilities, and it also tells us what's the system that we use to select the people who govern. Because the minister did say that we have a representative government. So it is very important that as we go through this process, we ask ourselves, how do we want to be governed? Do we want to have that same two-party system? Do we want to still have where only the leader of a party can become prime minister and engage the public? You see these questions that they're asking? This is not 1961. This is 2023. Twitter, social media, everybody's right to say something is well recognized. How we get them involved in the process allows them to have some skin in the game. So at the end of this process, when the opposition minister could say just now, when you're in government, you want to do something to have latitude. And when you're in opposition, you want to make sure that... Pull back. I disagree with that. I think government must always have at the center the people they govern and their rights. How we articulate the best way to achieve the goal is what is going to be important. And having the participation of the citizens in a town hall. So don't tell me we did this in 61. Now we can do it again, and we can guide the process because we can do it in segments and phases.
Well, I know the minister wants to comment on the segments and phases, but Jeanette, let me bring you in first. So that issue of public participation and what you're sensing from the public.
I'm so glad you asked me that because I've been dying to read a quote here. And Donna did mention about what the public is feeling and sensing. And I was so struck by this, I have to share it with everybody here. This is the Carlstone report of 1991. And he's saying, and I hope you get some context here, he says, if we are to judge by the writing style, they had 62 submissions from the public to Mr. Stone, telling them how they thought the parliament could function better and how their parliamentarians could serve them better. And he's saying here, if we are to judge by the writing style and the presentation of the written submissions to the committee, some 43% of these submissions have come from persons with a limited grasp of the English language. So that's telling us what their education level is. But he goes on to say, The interesting thing is that their submissions contained as much major points of substance as those written in finer English and with more polished prose. This is 1991. And so I just want to reiterate that the public is ready for participation.
Correct.
The people of Jamaica understand what's not working for them. And what's fascinating about the Carlstone report, Dion, is that not only did they know what wasn't working, but they had ideas about what could work for them. So I am all ready for the public engagement, and I'm not so clear on what phase 1 and phase 2 is. So I'm hoping that the minister can clear it up for me and the rest of us here.
That's what you call a perfect segue, Minister.
Indeed.
My pleasure.
I don't think I can hide my own excitement. What a privilege, of course, an enormous responsibility to be assigned, the role that I'm assigned at this time. Everyone who knows me know how excited I am about the law. And the thing about a democracy is that you have to involve the people. And there is no getting around it. The Constitution itself tells you that when you come to make the kind of changes that we are in the process of making, you have to involve the people. So the work of engaging must be done, and it cannot only be done by the parliamentarians, and that's why a forum like this is important. Congratulations, Jeanette, and to you and all who are here.
Tell me about phase 1 and phase 2.
Phase 1. So the constitution reform and constitution making is a lot of work. And we have decided to do it in phases based on the 3 types of clauses we have in the Constitution. So the first phase will involve the matters for which we require referendum. And so far, those are the matters that by and large there is consensus on. But I do take note of the issue as to what kind of president. Do we do an executive president or do we keep a ceremonial president? The consensus so far is to do it ceremonially. And I think...
But consensus by who, though? Because I always find
right,
the PNP
right.
and JLP thinks they are them one. Make
No.
consensus.
So we are not starting the work from scratch. We are building on recommendations that were made
A generation
over
ago.
time. Yes. A part of the process is to look at whether the perspectives still hold given the passage of time. So that review is built in the formal process. And we will have to see how much of it we open up and in what time frame. So upfront, we recognize that when you complete work and you do not implement the work, you will always, it makes good sense to ask whether the perspectives still hold, do the assumptions still hold. But
If I just want to make sure I'm understanding you correctly. So you're saying it's not set in stone in terms of remove the king, ceremonial president.
the Jamaica Labour Party supports a separation between the state and the government. And we have done some research around that. So with an executive president, the head of government is also the head of state.
Right.
And we have looked at the research around countries, especially those in the Americas, where you have the head of government and the head of state residing in the same person. And whether or not, given our history and where we are in the nation, it makes sense. But we do keep an open mind. But right now, going into the process for the government, it is to separate the head of state from the head of government, because you do want to keep your state above the politics that is involved in government.
And just to
party
understand
politics.
then,
Yes.
I see Prof trying to come in.
Yes.
Just before that, I just want to clarify one thing, Prof. So when you talk about phase one then,
Yes.
will there be, the public forum, the discussions, or is it just going to be a kind of foregone conclusion? That's what I'm trying to understand.
So what I promise you is that we will do a reporting out to the public at every stage. Allow me to have the first meeting of the committee, and then we exchange some perspectives on the approach to be taken. We have a draft terms of reference to be settled by the committee when it is formally constituted. But just to say that among the issues to be decided also is what powers you would have the head of state performing, not just ceremonial powers as exist now, but what would be the substantial powers, and those we will open up for discussion. Yes.
Okay, I want to go to the studio audience, but Prof, you wanted to respond to
Yes,
that very
just to
quickly.
say that the opposition spokesperson and Marlene's remarks a while ago indicate the urgency of public education. You ask how many folks, what's the difference between a ceremonial and an executive president? And that's a university question, which lends itself to many essays. For example, it is arguable as to whether we now have an entirely ceremonial Governor General. It is the Governor General who appoints our integrity commission, for example. He doesn't have to follow what the Prime Minister says. He doesn't have to follow what the leader of the opposition says. He's required to consult, but he takes the decision. Now, is that entirely ceremonial? No, not at all. So we have to look at degrees rather than black and white. There are some ceremonial presidents who only inspect the Guard of Honor.
Yes.
And there are others who do more than inspect the Guard of Honor, as ours does now. On the other hand, there are executive presidents who are literally almost dictators in respect of their particular countries, especially in Latin America.
Yeah, so whole heap of discussion on that. But let me go to our first question from our studio audience. We have Shauna Kay from Capri.
Hi. So based on the conversation that we've been having, it's clear that there will be a strong correlation between the reform and the level of transparency we have in government. And the minister also said that there will be avenues for citizens to participate. Now, participation is good, but will there be a committee to ensure that the participation of citizens is not falling on deaf ears, that their inputs will be actioned?
Okay. Thank you so much, Shauna Kay. Minister, I think that's you.
That's for you, Minister.
I give you my commitment that nothing will fall on deaf ears, even where we have different views on the matter. And I think there is much to learn from how we do things, how we have done things in the past. And my own commitment is to do it better. And I recognize that none of us has a monopoly on doing things well. And that's why we will engage and collaborate. The process by nature has to be collaborative. And it is not under my leadership going to be empty collaboration or mere symbolism. Just to pick up on the point made by Professor Monroe. So the Governor General now, who acts as head of state, is not merely ceremonial in the functions that he performs. So the Governor General and the Constitution itself tells you how the Governor General exercises his discretion and powers vested in him. Generally, he will act on the advice of the cabinet or a minister with the permission of the cabinet, under the guidance of the cabinet. But there are also matters where the Governor General acts in his own discretion. There are matters where he acts on the advice of persons, in consultation with persons. So ceremonial president doesn't mean that you do nothing. And I think perhaps that's the wrong term that we should use. We're taught in school that the GG is nothing but a titular head. And what has come with that? The entire public service is vested properly under the Governor General.
Hold that thought for me, Minister. I'm right at the break, so we're going to go to break. Conversation heating up. And I know I have another question from our studio audience. Stay tuned. We'll soon come.
Brutality isn't a legality. There's no rationality as to why this abnormality should become a mentality. A mentality which kills and tortures. Are you really telling me you're afraid to speak up because you might be called an informer? Let us break the barrier of brutality and enforce it with alacrity. If you know someone who has been victimized, I charge you to I, interrupt their situations before their O. Oppressor continues to L, lurk in their lives. Let us E, extend our hands to our brothers and sisters who are being victimized, and N, never see violent acts and ignore them. Let us C, come together and be the E, example, so we may end a barrier on brutality.
Thank you so much for staying with us for this special program on Jamaica's constitutional reform. What's the road ahead? That's what we're trying to figure out. The program is brought to you by the Jamaica Accountability Meter portal JAMP with sponsorship by the Open Society Foundations. I'm Dion Jackson-Miller. Now, I just want to share some more questions that members of the public have been sending in, and then we'll go back to our studio audience. So Jaganel, Twitter handle, reached out to us on Twitter, in fact, and asked, and this question is so relevant to what we were discussing before the break, will the office of the Governor General finally be removed? Jaganel says it's a waste of resources. And we also have this video question from Vashan.
My name is Vashan Brown. I'm a student at the London School of Economics and Political Science. And my question is the Westminster system still appropriate for Jamaica in 2023?
Okay, and let's just take some more questions before I go back to the panel. So let's start with Beverly. Beverly?
Yes, thank you. I just want to go back to public participation, and I will relay an experience I had. I called the office of the minister, yes, same one sitting here, and asked about public participation and stated that I would like to get involved if I could be a part of the committee or something else. And I was told by her office that I can't. There is no room for me. And I asked, so how can I participate as an ordinary member of the public? And I was told, oh, we'll let you know when there is a public session. So my question is, what avenues are being created for the general public, people who are interested, as we've seen, to get involved, not in a token kind of way, but to really get involved in this process?
Thank you so much, Beverly. And let me just go to Emile now. Emile? Emile, of course, a former president of the Jamaica Bar Association. Now, because may I call him Emile, right, Emile?
That's perfectly fine, Dion, perfectly fine. Yes. Morning to everyone. Having participated in a few non-government organizations, one of the themes I've heard this morning is this whole question of participation, having a voice, and so on. And certainly my experience has been that the participation of NGOs generally has been inconsistent at times, depending on what is being done and what the objective and how speedy they want it to be done. In the context of the Constitution being the overarching document, is there any intention to formalize a need for consultation in the amendment of ordinary legislation? That's one. And two, to put in place any enforceable timelines for legislative review. Because one of the concerns that we have seen from both the legal and business side is where we have this legislation which was intended to be reviewed and updated periodically, but it simply languishes in its original form. And there is no, there seems to be, let me phrase it that way, no impetus or ability to update it to meet modern standards and requirements.
All right, I'm going to stop you there, Emile. Thank you so much. All right, so we had a whole heap there. So let me just recap quickly. Jaganel was asking, will we have a real president? Vashan said, are we sticking with Westminster? Beverly was asking about participation, saying she tried calling into the Ministry of Legal and Constitutional Affairs and didn't feel she was really getting any advice in terms of avenues for participation. And Emile asking about building in consultation, especially in relation to NGOs, as well as timelines for legislative review. All right. No, not pretending that we can answer every single question on constitutional reform during this period, but we're seeing themes coming out there. Minister, back to you. Let me
begin
first
with Beverly.
Yes,
let me
please.
begin with Beverly. You know, I'm so pleased that Beverly would have called in to indicate her willingness to participate in the process. I don't know with whom she spoke. And I think the answer that she got in respect of the committee, it is because the committee itself is a high-level committee, but then it will break out for its consultative work. So I'll have a quiet word with her afterwards. The ministry is new, we're still building out, and I think we will be setting up a secretariat to assist the work of the committee and the entire reform work. That is in process. So I think those persons who will call in will get a different kind of response. But I will speak with her.
Right.
That's,
I want to
that's
ask Prof about Westminster, but let me ask you first.
About
is that an
Westminster.
answer? Bashan is saying, are we going to stick with the Westminster government?
In spite of the challenges we have in this nation, we have had a stable democracy. When you compare what occurs in the Americas or around the world, and the intention is to preserve the best of it and make changes that will move us in the direction that we should go. So.
Can I follow on that?
And yes, I do, but I just wanted to say to our viewers, so when we talk about a Westminster-style government, we're talking about, we have two chambers in Parliament, an elected lower house and unelected upper house. We have a powerful Prime Minister heading a cabinet. We have an independent judiciary as well. Yes, Prof.
I was about to take off from what Minister just said, that Westminster is evolving. In Westminster itself, there have been changes which we, NIA and others have advocated, which have not been done in Jamaica. Let me give you two examples. In Westminster, they now have the citizens have the power to recall a member of the House of Commons before the end of his term or her term in office by virtue of a certain percentage of that constituency saying we do not think that member of parliament is performing, we want a vote to remove him. The only country in the Caribbean that has adopted that important innovation, which empowers the people beyond every 5 years, is Belize. And it seems to be working pretty well. The other change, of course, in the Westminster is the power of impeachment, where the citizens, again, have that possibility of initiating. We don't have that except in one area, that is Jamaica's best-kept secret, namely the local government system, where the mayor of a municipality, in this case we have one, Portmore, can be recalled by a petition initiated by the members of that particular municipality. So Westminster is changing. We have the possibility of innovating. We were the first predominantly black country in the entire world to get universal adult suffrage in 1944. Others followed behind. We have the capacity to continue innovating. We are the only country in the Caribbean that has an integrity commission of the kind that we have. We are the only country in the Caribbean that has campaign finance regulations, limited as they may be. So let's use the opportunity not to throw the baby with the bathwater, because Minister is correct. Of all the countries, indeed of most democracies in the world, there are only about 10 that for the last 70-odd years have had constitutionally mandated elections where governments leave and oppositions come in, and without assassinations of presidents, as in the United States, assassinations of civil society leaders, as Martin Luther King in the United States, military rulers in Pakistan and Ghana and Nigeria, all of which we have not had, thank God. Wow. And that has to do with the quality of the leadership and the vigilance of our people, which needs to be intensified, and they need to insist that consultation is not, as it has often been regrettably, a face card. In 2009, we had in 2009 we had the biggest consultative process in setting up Vision 2030. You check to see whether the proposal from that Vision 2030 to have a code of conduct for parliamentarians, 2009, we're 2023, has it been done?
Yeah,
so we need to ensure that the consultative process has impact.
Wanted to bring you in on Emil's question, your thoughts on that, the participation of NGOs, whether that kind of consultation should be formalized, he's asking.
Well, I think that's a good suggestion, particularly the NGOs who are already applying themselves to matter of legal interpretation and constitutional reform. But I know there's a concern, and I will hasten to say that one of the challenges with inviting NGOs, especially the formal ones, is the extent to which people are concerned that there's a certain amount of co-opting. Their voices are louder. They're actually a little bit more used to engaging with politicians. So the question of how much their interests are served over and above other members of the society is a legitimate concern at the same time. So I'm trying to balance it there by saying we can put mechanisms in place to make sure other voices are heard, but absolutely there would be value of including NGOs who are a little ahead of the others in the conversation.
And I look forward to all the submissions that are going to be coming out. I haven't forgotten Emil's question about a timeline for legislative review, but we have questions piling up, more questions as well, so let's hear from Kyle.
So good morning to everyone present. My name is Kyle Fong and I'm the current Faculty of Law representative for the UWI Mono Guild. And my question is centered around more so the education of the general public. So of course, constitutional reform forums such as this, it's very important, but majority of the public may not participate or even want to speak on it simply because they don't necessarily understand the idea of what the living instrument is in the sense of the Constitution. And just as was mentioned earlier, it's very intense to even understand as a law student studying it. So is there any actual plan to kind of gear towards educating the general public as to what the Constitution is so that they can better input any knowledge that they have?
Yeah, I love that because that's so, it sounds so basic, but it's so critical and so important. Daniel, you're jumping in.
So important. People are hungry for information. They're hungry. And that's why I keep saying, when we talk about consultation and we talk about getting people involved, Miss Beverly, you're on point. It's not just for the high level, the intellectuals. The regular people want to be more than, I hear you, I want to know. And so I think going forward and coming out of this, it would be instructive for the minister. As she has said, set up the secretariat, draw them in. It allows people, hear me talk about having skin in the game? When we as a people, the majority of us who don't have the tertiary education, but we are the regular ones who keep the mill going, we want to have that say. And it's so important because then, and only then, will we get to where NIA and other NGOs have been asking for, when people say we can hold the government accountable because they understand that it's the people who have the power.
Okay, so there are a couple of questions there for the minister, but we're at break, so let's go to break and we come back and we go back to the hot seat. And there she is, we'll soon come.
Region 2, we're coming! It's your turn for the RJ Gleaner Cross Country Invasion 2023. All roads lead to Manchester High School for Region 2 Sports Day this Saturday, February 25. Come out for football, netball, wall ball, strongman competition, farmers market, road safety demonstration, career village with JCF and BPO recruiting, kiddies village with rides and JLS reading corner, artist performances and so much more. It's the RJ Gleaner Cross Country Invasion Region 2 Sports Day this Saturday, February 25, Manchester High School. One nation, one family.
The RJR Gleaner Communications Group Cross Country Invasion is brought to you courtesy of the main sponsor, Population and Housing Census, in association with Sunshine Snacks, Caribbean Dreams, Link, Digicel Foundation, Access Financial Services Limited, H&L Rapid True Value and H&L Agro, The Guardian Group, Gateway Cooperative Credit Union, Changbak Tonic Wine, Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries, Development Bank of Jamaica, and Q Mall.
Thank you so much for staying with us for this special program on Jamaica's constitutional reform, The Road Ahead, brought to you by the Jamaica Accountability Meter portal, JAMP, with sponsorship by the Open Society Foundations. I'm Dion Jackson-Miller. All right, so if the minister thought she had a whole heap of questions to answer, let's just pile on a couple more. All right, so let Javain go ahead. Javain?
All right, so good morning, everyone. I am Javain Brown, the Constitutional Committee Chairperson of the Normandy Student Society Association. All right, so I have a two-part question. One part is, I have not heard so far a timeline in when we are expecting the implementation of these provisions, the formulation of these provisions for new constitutional reform. So when do we have a timeline in mind for that formulation and implementation? And also the referendum, that will be, I suspect, the method of involving citizens in constitutional change. But in terms of the referendum, we have said we don't have economic strength for a local government election, right? So if that may be the case, how then are we going to have an execution of a referendum in the same manner we do not have economic viability for the execution of a local government election?
Boy, Kyle, you bowl some bones to them, man. But let me just take Robert's question as well. Go ahead, Robert.
Pitch Wasi.
Hi, morning, everyone. My question is for Ezio. So I'm the vice president, or one of the vice presidents of the Jamaica Manufacturers and Exporters Association. So first, let me commend for the mammoth task that is being taken on. And of course, we know it's a responsibility of government to get the communication going so that you can have really useful feedback. But we can't leave everything to the government. So my question, therefore, is organizations such as the GMA, the JCC, and others. For example, we have members, over 500 members, and a couple 100,000 employees. What's our role? How can we help? How can we help to get that information out so that everyone is on the same page?
Nice.
All right, Robert Scott, that was, thank you. And let's just throw in two more. Let's go to this video question from Gabriel.
Hello everyone, I'm Gabrielle Elliott Williams and I teach in the Faculty of Law at the Mona campus of the UA. I've visited the Privy Council before and I've seen foreign lawyers for the appellant, foreign lawyers representing Jamaica, and the foreign judges of the Privy Council together, sometimes fumbling in the dark, trying to figure out how best to order our society. I recently came across a quote by Mia Mottley when she was Barbados' Attorney General, asking whether the region should set up its own final court of appeal or whether it should continue to loiter on colonial premises. And so I asked, will Jamaica's leaders on both sides together urge us away from loitering and towards investing in our own regional institution? Thank you.
And the last one for now, let's bring up a tweet. This tweet from Zesty. And in fact, there are quite a few people asking this particular question. Zesty was asking whether or not the reform will include protections for LGBT society members. All right, Minister, let's take them one by one. First of all, let me go back to Emil's quick question in terms of should we have timelines for legislative review? Should that be a part of the discussion?
I think the concern about how long it takes to pass law is a genuine one. In fact, I am utterly frustrated with how long it takes to get things done. But I bear in mind that there is a process, and the process involves stages. The work of the ministry now is trying to set realistic timelines. But government is not a one-man show. There are numerous offices and office holders who are involved in the process. And if I were to share with you what I have seen and experienced in the year that I have been in this office, believe me, I have been to the point of tearing out my hair. Unbelievable. So a big part of what needs to be done is reform around the civil service and reform around the public service, and also around the rules. So the standing orders are regulations of the Constitution. And one of the questions is whether the rules that currently exist enable efficient decision making and processes. I've long said when I came to Parliament that I think we should have every member of Parliament involved in a subject area around legislation so they can participate in the process.
Right,
so simple answer is yes, we're working towards it. But let me tell you something. It's like pulling teeth out. The skill set, the complexity of matters, and just the general approach. But over my live body, we will get there.
Kyle was asking about public education. Are we going to educate the public so people can really participate in an informed way?
I don't think there is any getting around educating the public, because the public has a role. Those who are registered to vote have a role to play in passing the law. And beyond that, even those who are not registered to vote, they have rights and responsibilities that they need to know. The education of our people, I think, is perhaps the biggest work ahead of us in the nation. What does it mean to be a citizen? What does it mean to be a Jamaican? Right. I mean, it's not rights without responsibility. How are you going to function effectively, play your own part in the society? So that is a role, I mean, that is a work that is huge. And I think it was a chairman of the JMBA? Vice President, who said that this is not something that government alone can do. All of us will have to come together to get it done. Mind you, the government has a particular role and a special role, which it cannot abdicate.
I know I've seen some TV spots, for instance, with you speaking about the Constitution. So I hear Kyle asking, is there going to be a whole lot more of that as well as the in-person engagements?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So pray for health and strength and all things. But yes, and we've been engaging. You know, my preference has been not always before an audience and the TV camera. But there's a lot of work ahead, and we have started. We have started in earnest.
And that leads us to Javain, who was asking about a timeline. When is all this going to happen?
Well, I actually thought that we would have been a little further down the wicket. A lot of the background work has been done. We were stalled with the formalization of the Constitutional Reform Committee. I had indicated an ambitious timeline last year when I spoke in the sectoral debate. And I am working, subject to the process, to see if we can meet that deadline, at least with phase one.
They hope that we would have the referendum in relation to removing the monarch.
The bill tabled to do the amendment for the bill that would go to the people. Yes.
So that the referendum itself could
so
be, you had said by the next election.
Right. Interestingly, when the People's National Party was in government, and they actually had set out to do part of the reform work. And it was not with a consultative process at all. I came upon a bill, and you would have seen that part of the work that was done just brought a bill to the Parliament. They started with the CCJ that ended abortively because of the lack of consensus.
Let me...
So timeline has to be tempered with what you put into getting the work done. So you can move quickly in a way that does not involve the extensive consultation, and you go quickly. But once you engage, remember, you have to bear in mind that that too will take time.
And then Javane also wanted to know how you're going to afford a referendum if we can't afford local government
So
elections.
one of the questions, I mean, cheeky question, but the one of the
I think he's going for my job.
No, man, I understand it. So one of the questions that has to be answered is whether we hold the referendum with an election. Do we move to holding local and general elections together, notwithstanding the 1-year difference in the cycle? We're open to taking advice. So far, just because of the experience we have had and what we have seen in the rest of the Commonwealth Caribbean, it may not make sense to do them together. It's the first time we're going since federation. But the truth is that the elections are costly, and budget is not unlimited, and it is one of the issues, even as we consider the local government postponement, is to determine in rationalizing the budget what would make sense. But we have not concluded on the matter because we do have to take advice around the referendum. We certainly wouldn't want to go to a referendum and not yield the result that we want in ending the monarchy. The constitutional monarchy as a form of government.
I'm nearly at break, but I can not ask this question because a whole heap of people have been asking Gabriel's question, Caribbean Court of Justice and Privy Council.
So the final court is an issue that we will have to discuss, because right now there isn't consensus between the opposition and the government, and it is not one of the matters for which we require a referendum. That will be in phase 2 of the reform. But there is going to be no getting around having a proper discussion on what should Jamaica final court be. Absolutely no way we can get around it. It's that question will be dealt with in the second phase. The CCJ is not a fait accompli because we also have the option of a Jamaica final court. No decision has been taken. So we will have an avenue where we discuss the matter frankly and candidly, hopefully once and for all, because we cannot move to making this change without also making a determination on that issue. And there are options.
Madam
Moderator,
we have an opportunity to comment on the local government issue.
In the next segment. Let me just go to the break, Prof, and then we'll come back and have our panelists weigh in on some of the issues that we have been talking about in this segment. Stay tuned, we'll soon come.
COVID-19 tip. Protect yourself and others from getting sick by washing your hands after coughing or sneezing, when caring for the sick, before, during, and after you prepare food, before eating, after toilet use, when hands are visibly dirty, and after handling animals or animal waste.
Thank you so much for staying with us for this special program on Jamaica's constitutional reform, The Road Ahead, brought to you by the Jamaica Accountability Meter Portal, JAMP, sponsorship by the Open Society Foundations. I'm Dion Jackson Miller, your moderator, and already final segment and about 20 questions to go. So let's see how we're going to work this. But Professor Trevor Monroe, you wanted to weigh in on the local government issue. Then I'll ask the other panelists if they have comments on what we're talking about in the previous segment.
Yes, first of all, a correction. 2011 was a major amendment to the Charter of Fundamental Rights, but in 2015, the local government system was inserted in our Constitution for the first time after 20 years of discussion. That gives it a level of importance that it did not have before, and therefore the precedent set by previous administrations to postpone local government elections 1990 to 1996, the fourth time it's now been postponed, is not acceptable, because it does not make sense to say that we do not have money to activate a fundamental basis and avenue for citizen participation, which is how it is described in the constitutional amendment, which now is part of our constitution. And to that extent, I associate myself fully with the Citizens Action for Fair and Free Elections and the private sector organization, that this is an unacceptable postponement, especially with the reasons given, and it does not show sufficient regard to that particular constitutional provision, even though the constitutional provision does say that it is the government of the day which determines when the election is held. And I think Minister needs to give careful consideration to this, because it is an indication that aspects of our constitution, even inadequate as these are being given insufficient weight. There's absolutely no reference to this point made by the minister in his reasons for postponement. At least it should have been addressed.
Got you, Prof. Jeanette. Yeah, got here. And Daniel, so many issues there in the previous segment. Unless you want to jump in, let me go back.
You may go back to the minister, because Professor Monroe did articulate my point about the local government. And I think it's really important, because it shows a scant disregard for public participation. And if we want the public to participate in our constitutional reform, it is an excellent opportunity to put the foundation in place for local government and have it done so that you can secure their participation.
Okay, the question Minister Zesty was asking, is a reform discussion going to include protections for the LGBT community?
A hot button issue, a real hot button issue. I think that the gates that have been opened will not be closed in our lifetime, will never be closed. And there are important issues within the LGBT community and other communities that have to be addressed. The interesting thing, is that when you sit as a legislator, you make decisions and you pass laws on behalf of people who share and do not share your private morality. And the question is, what is your duty to them? Since the ministry has been established, I certainly have been engaging with groups with the issue around discrimination. The matter is deep-seated and deep-rooted in the Jamaican society. I recently read comments on that question in one of the social media forum, and every time I see what is expressed, it just reminds me of how much work lies ahead of us on this issue.
Okay, let me go back to our studio audience, and we have Sifani.
Okay, my question is to the minister. And while I understand that we have actions and plans that are being taken or are taken in terms of the decision-making processes for the constitutional reform, and I understand that the Constitutional Reform Committee is a high-level committee, and you're taking decisions from everyone, I wanted to find out, is there youth representation on that committee? And also, are you able to share some of the members of the committee?
Thank you so much. Let me just go to Glynis as well and take Glynis's question before we take the answer.
It's both a comment and followed by a question. Yes, I hear the talk. The public must be engaged. They will be engaged. Yes, there will be public education to inspire participation and all of that. But my concern all the time, whether it is on constitutional reform, issues of governance and accountability, all the big issues that as a nation we grapple with, it's how do we ensure that the people understand the issues? How is it languaged? How is it communicated? So often the communication process appears to be more form than substance. So we say we have a communication campaign, but indeed it's really not connecting with the people. So my cynicism is, and therefore my question is, how can you expect participation when the issues are not communicated in such a way that they understand? And two, some of the other issues that must be grappled with before you can get to the big things, how are you breaking it down so that it all comes together for the citizenry?
Thank you so much. First question is youth participation on the committee, Minister.
Yes, there is a slot for youth representative. We still have a little bit more work to do in settling the committee, but hope to do so in short order, since the leader of the opposition has communicated his representatives to me and also made a recommendation coming out of the Vale Royal talks.
All right. And
so
Glynis is
one.
now asking then about effect not just communication for communication's sake, but making sure
Right.
people really understand and connect.
So she spoke about cynicism, and I think I understand the cynicism. I'm not a communications expert at all, but I do know what it means to understand and be understood. And irrespective of the language that we speak, at the end of the day, you know, when I sat as a judge of the parish court many years ago, I had such an interesting lesson in understanding. People would come to court and they would speak in a way, let me tell you, I had such a hard time breaking it down, much less writing it. And I had to write as they spoke and then translate it into formal English to say by what they mean. And I moved away from the annoyance that I had, you know, as a student, because you hear every day, speak properly. What does that mean? To say the essence of communication is to understand and be understood. So the cynicism is understandable. The work is just a lot, and no one has a monopoly on it. And it is my intention to take an approach to get the help, because the Jamaicans have resources, they are resourceful. And at the end of the day, if the goal is to ensure that those who must participate in law, because we can't get it done if we don't go through the formal process, you know. Professor Monroe, when he spoke about the rights. It's not just the rights that the Constitution protects, but it also protects the process by which you do things. So a matter can be struck down if it is procedurally irregular and improper.
Because you're getting into
A
the
lot of
weeds.
work ahead of us with the communication. So how the issues are languaged, as you say, and communicated.
All right.
A lot of work ahead of
Dion,
us.
just to throw in there so that people understand that it's part and parcel of what entities like NIA, JAMP, ILE have been doing. They have been doing a lot of getting to know the Constitution. It's almost like a meeting on the verandas, a porch with persons. I think more of that needs to happen, but we just started. And so NGOs will continue to mesh and meet you on your veranda. People have been calling for conversations, and we've been going to bars. Some of us have been just hanging out, just explaining things. That is one of the things I think Minister would help Minister in sharing the information, so we meet people at their level.
Okay, I
Let
just,
me
I just have a
Dion,
couple
let me
minutes.
just say, please.
30
so
seconds.
Right now, I chose to be here, and I will have to run from here to
No,
a
what,
meeting of the
Minister?
National Security
Right.
Council.
All right, we have an
Simply
important-
because I appreciate the importance of this kind of engagement.
And the importance of this
Yes.
final video question, because we just have a couple minutes left, and this is really important.
Hi, I'm Marilyn Facey, a doctoral student at the University of Illinois at Chicago. I'd like to know what measures are being put in place to ensure that the progress we failed to make over the past 12 years can be made within the next 2 years.
All right, so I'm going to ask Minister to answer very quickly and then go to everybody else for a quick final comment, because we're nearly out of time. Minister, how do we ensure that we're actually going to get somewhere this time?
That's why we're doing the work in phases. That's why we're going to start on the matters on which we have consensus, to let you know that we're serious this time in getting it done, and then we work through the more difficult issues. Because if we wait to build consensus on everything, believe me, who said it would be? They would be in their wheelchair. Was it
Was
Senator
Donna.
Scott
Motley.
Motley?
Donna, yeah.
So,
All right.
failure is not an option for me.
Prof, you have 20 seconds.
Fully
Final
agree.
comment.
Fully agree with the minister. She'll be surprised to hear. There has to be a phased basis, and the first step is to remove the King of England from the capacity which he exercised 3 days ago to order the Jamaican government to accept the ruling of the Privy Council in respect of the Vibes Cartel issue. That is the language. King of England ordering the Jamaican government to accept it within a specific period. That is completely unacceptable.
All right, going to stop you there. Daniel, final comment.
I know quite so it goes.
You know, at the end of the day, much more work to be done. I think the recognition is it's not just a government thing, it's a people thing. And we have to get involved and start demanding greater participation, ask your questions. Find the people, ask the questions. NIA is willing, so is JAMP, and so there are many entities available. Jamie, I was pleased to hear that they too are saying, look, we have employees and we want to be a part of it. Everybody should be brought in.
And Jeanette.
In 1977, somebody wrote to the Gleaner, his name, he said he's Hungry Belly. And he said the grassroots people will never understand what the whole constitutional debate is about, and it will only cause more confusion along with what we're already confused about. I am actually going to encourage Glynis not to be cynical. I've heard what the minister has said, and I'm really driven always by hope, and I'm going to raise my expectation and believe that the minister and the ministry is going to raise their performance to meet ours. That's what I want to encourage you, Glynis, and everybody else to say.
Good one, too.
We're not going to have any
Leave
hungry
it there,
bellies.
everybody. We have to leave it there.
Thank you to JAMP and to you for organizing this forum. I think we're off to a good start and a good example that it's going to take all of us to get the work of public education done, among other things.
And on that note, thank you so much for having been with us for this special look at constitutional reform, the road ahead. As you can see, we're just at the start of the road, so we're going to be having a whole lot more conversations like this. Thanks so much for participating. Thanks for all the fantastic questions there from members of the public. Very special thanks to our panelists, especially the Minister of Legal and Constitutional Affairs, who, as we say, took time from her busy schedule. Also, opposition spokesperson on justice, Senator Donna Scott Motley. Thanks to our very engaged studio audience. Thanks for watching. I'm Dion Jackson-Miller.
Your weekend with a Weekend Star, where we have everything exciting to power up your weekend. A sports magazine, more entertainment coverage, weekend escape, and even more of what is happening to people out there. The Weekend Star, we gather the most interesting, the most compelling, and most entertaining stories to kickstart your weekend. The Weekend Star, still the people paper. Get your copy this Friday.